Today, we're going to focus on 3 storytelling tips. My name is Tanya Suarez, and I'm a communication coach, and I specialize with working with professionals who are non native speakers. So, my work is about helping you speak English effectively, not just fluently, because those are two different things, and to lead confidently. Because it's really hard. It's different. It's a different experience when you are in a leadership position. Not only do you have to make sure that your skills are apparent, that your executive presence is there, but you have to do it in a different language. And so that kind of training is unique because your experience is unique. So the topic of today is storytelling, specifically American English storytelling. The way that we share stories, and I don't just mean like long, what you might be thinking about with a story. A presentation is a story, a conversation is a story. The American style can be different from the culture that you're from. And that's something that's very important to understand because there are things that you might be doing without realizing that you're using the storytelling from your culture and it doesn't quite translate. And I don't mean word for word translation, I mean the message. And this can be something that's impacting how you connect with people, how you share your ideas, and perhaps some confusion that you might be causing. Or what I find with my clients is you're giving off the wrong impression. And we'll talk about that in our tips. So this is really important so that you can be your most genuine, authentic self in English, which is very important, especially for business. And remember to go to my website, tanyasuarez.com/lead, and download my free audio training so you can get to know the 3 essentials of American leadership communication. It's incredibly helpful and it really gives you a nice solid base so that you understand maybe what you're doing wrong or what you could do better. Today, we're going to focus on storytelling. This is so important because I work with my clients tend to be upper intermediate to completely fluent in English. So it's not about your English level. It's really about the art of conversation. It's about adapting your storytelling to the culture that you're communicating to. And in general, American English is the default for corporate culture. So it's really important for you to be comfortable with it. It will not only help you connect and communicate better. I find that when I do this work with my clients, they start realizing, oh, that's why they talk that way. That's why. So things that you might perceive that Americans do that maybe feel a little rude or a little awkward, it's actually part of our storytelling style and our conversation style. When you understand that, you perceive them more accurately. And most importantly, you get to be perceived more authentically. Because I do feel that there is something that gets a little bit lost in translation in terms of the essence of you. It's not just about, is your English as good as your native language? I really focus on, is your communication like it is in your native language? And that doesn't mean the exact same way, but rather, are you communicating your humor, your message, your style in a way that people understand it? It's an art and it's really, I think it's fascinating. Now, the first tip I have for you is get to the point. This is so important because a lot of you are from cultures that tend to, I'll give you an example. So last week I was working with a few clients from Brazil and from a few countries in Latin America. Now, in Latin America, the storytelling style, how do I put this nicely? It's very scenic. You take the scenic route. And then eventually, when you take me through this journey of information, you get to the point. Unfortunately, when you do that in English, it's going to be perceived in a way that I know is not genuine to your personality. What that translates to, number one, from your experience perspective, you might notice that you're losing people's attention. And you might think, is it my English? Am I using the wrong structure? And so you might overcompensate by giving even more detail, which is what you were doing wrong in the first place. So this is why it's really important to understand this. So the way that we communicate in American English is, I always say, we speak in bullet points. We always do the bullet point, the most important information first, and then we add other information and details. This is also true of emails. So a lot of times what I do with my clients is they send me email samples because first I want to analyze how you communicate in writing in the corporate setting of email. And that tells me a lot but it also is a very, very quick way to see the results of this kind of training. So when you look at the emails that you send, especially if you're in a leadership position, I recommend looking at the emails that you send to your team. What do you start with? The way that the American mentality works, I like to summarize it as, if you don't scroll, if you don't click read more, for example, if it's a caption, have have you given me all of the information that I absolutely need? If the answer is no, that you have to really like decipher what the email says and like read into it or get to the end, that's a big red flag. You want to start with the main point with the action and then with all of the details in the breakdown. This is true of verbal and nonverbal communication. So get to the point first. It is going to feel uncomfortable if you're from a culture that tends to be more flowery in its descriptions, if it tends to be more storytelling. For example, Arabic is so wonderfully descriptive. So when you translate literally that style, it's going to come across as too much. And especially in corporate America, what happens is you think you're giving more. And sometimes the combination of the language and the style, and perhaps if you have a stronger accent, in the way your body language is, if you're not fully confident in that as well, it might make other people feel like you don't quite know what you're talking about, or you're kind of beating around the bush because you're not really confident in the information. So this is where this is matter. Oh, this is so impactful, because I really want to make sure that by the time you're in the positions if you follow me, if you're my client, by the time you've gotten to these positions, I know that you're confident in your expertise, but your communication style might be hurting your reputation. So you might be perceived as someone who is insecure about the expertise, when really all you're doing is you're trying to use another language. And this is such a matter that's close to my heart. You should not be penalized for that. Your career shouldn't suffer because of that. So that's where this kind of training helps you understand those moments where you can optimize your communication skills to make sure that your expertise, your leadership, your executive presence is what it deserves to be. So get to the point. Now, we did talk about sharing details. So the details are next. Now, the caveat here, the specification is, I only want you to share details if they're needed or wanted. And this is both in presentation, like whether you're giving a presentation or in a meeting, or if you're having just a casual conversation or small talk. There's a bit of an art to this. So we'll start with the formal communication first. Let's say you're giving a presentation. A presentation is not a report. And I find that because of the lack of training, a lot of companies will promote within, but there's no leadership communication training. Of course, you can outsource that to me. But if you haven't had that kind of training and English is not your native language, I find that this is where the leadership potential suffers. And a lot of the people that I work with, I know they're good leaders. And sometimes they might have a false or true sense of, in my native language, I know I'd be so much better. What they don't realize is, and this could be something that you're going through, just because you're a good leader in your native language doesn't mean you're naturally a good leader in English. It doesn't mean you're a bad leader, but there are certain other things to keep in mind. In addition to leadership strategies, there's also the communication strategies that are very important to supplement in your leadership training. So what I mean by share details only if needed, if you're giving a presentation, especially if you're in a leadership position, you're not there to give the full report. Email the report. If they need more details, they're going to ask for it. So you want to keep the PowerPoint, the visual, pretty minimal. Or if the PowerPoint is where you want to share the data, keep the verbal presentation, remember, bullet points. You want to share the main idea, the main point, the action. That's what you're there for. You're not there to go into all of this detail. And remember, part of this is if that's something that you're used to from your native language and the way that you would present, let's say in Brazil, where it's a lot more detail, it's going to be perceived differently when you're presenting to Americans or in a multinational company. You think you're doing, and I understand this, and I empathize with you. You think you're doing them a service by giving them more. But as you get in higher positions, you're there to be strategic, to give them less, to give them what they absolutely need to move forward, to move the needle, if you will. Now, if it's wanted, so that's if it's needed. If it's wanted, you want to create, and this is something that I always, is so important to me when it comes to leadership. You want to create a safe environment through your executive presence. You want to make sure that you create an environment where your team, your company, your employees, they all feel comfortable speaking up respectfully, and you can set the tone of there's time and place for it. So that way, if you're in a presentation, people are confident asking you questions, they're going to feel comfortable asking you to elaborate on a point. So if they need more details on something, this is where you can also practice when you're prepping for your presentations. Make sure you create moments where instead of just saving all the questions to the end, if it's a really important presentation or multifaceted, that might not be the most effective strategy. So you might want to create moments where you verbally say, the bullet point, the main idea, and then create an opportunity for if someone needs to ask for more information, and that way you're ready if they need it. And if not, then you're able to move forward. And so the way I think of it as is if your presentation could have been an email, if you just sent the PowerPoint or sent the report and that's enough, there shouldn't be a meeting. So you want to keep that in mind, because that helps you really analyze the information and say, okay, what about my being there, about my speaking, about my expertise is worth this taking up valuable time? And a lot of times that really helps you process the information and present it in a way where you really add value. And I find that so many companies just inundate their employees and their managers and directors with meeting after meeting after meeting. That's really valuable time. So I really like to be I treat that as precious time. And if you're not there to add value, I always say question your leadership. So this is a really great way for you to make sure you're always elevating, and that adds respect. That also adds a sense of, if this person, like if Tanya's calling this meeting, I know I need to show up and pay attention because this is going to be important. So it adds to your reputation and executive presence. And the third tip is ask questions. This is true of what I just mentioned about presentations. So you want to create those pockets. If waiting until the end of the presentation is not the most strategic because there's so much content, you want to ask those questions at appropriate windows to help people ask them questions so they can ask you questions. But I added this specifically because I've been doing this training. It's come up even more in like the last few weeks with multiple clients for small talk. And if I say small talk and your instinct is to get defensive or go, ugh, some of you really love it, some of you really hate it, that's okay. Regardless of whether you love or hate it, you need it. Americans value small talk. And I know it can feel kind of robotic or formulaic because we always talk about the same stuff at first, but I like to remind you that from a language perspective, that's really good for you because there's no guesswork. We always ask about the weather, ask about there's always the same topics. Think about those as a way to create safety, easy connection, build trust, and then you go deeper. And this is where asking questions comes in. Some of you may be from a culture that is very open. So I'll give you an example. I've actually had 3 Brazilians in the last month that I've worked with. And Brazilians are such a beautiful culture. I love you dearly. When it comes to communication and it translating to the American style, and I find a lot of Latin America tends to be this way. And I keep bringing that up because that's just been what I've been focused on the last few weeks. There are many other cultures who might also feel this way. You're very open. From an American's perspective, that's going to come across as oversharing. Pardon me. You might come across as someone who overshares, gets comfortable too quick, or complains a lot. Because what I find about those cultures who tend to be really open, there's not really a filter, and you're so trusting and vulnerable and open with so many things, and a lot of times about the negative things. Because as Americans, you know how we are by now. How are you? Good. How's life? Great. How was your vacation? Awesome. We always respond with some positive word at first. You really don't. I like to think about it as you earn the truth, you earn the vulnerability through establishing genuine connections. Whereas in other cultures, you just share. And so if someone asks you, how was your vacation? And you're going on and on about like, oh yeah, I was so excited, but then the weather was awful and my kids were crazy and da 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 da. That's going to be very overwhelming. It's going to be perceived as negative, and really all you were doing is being yourself. But it's about finding how to be yourself in a way that is perceived accurately in a different culture. So, the way that a little thing that you can do is remember bullet points. We just share little information. Typically, you want to answer superficially. And then as the conversation goes on, remember sharing details. I'm going to go back. You share details if needed or wanted. But the question I get with my clients when I'm working with them is, well, how do I know if they want it? It's because you have to make moments of questions. The way that Americans have small talk and more intimate conversation, I like to think about it like tennis. It has to go back and forth. Whereas in some other cultures, it's about give, 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 give. And the way you might be thinking of it is if they have something to say, they'll interrupt me. But Americans don't do that. And I find that a lot of other cultures, if you come with that expectation, you're just going to, it's going to sound like what we call verbal diarrhea. You're just speaking, speaking, speaking. You're fine. And you're like, wow, this person's great. They listen to me. But in their mind, they're like, does this person ever shut up? Does this person care about me? Because that's where I find the most important miscommunication happens. You think you're being open. You think they'll share if they have something to share. They're waiting for you to ask a question. And if you don't, it's going to be perceived like that person only talks about themselves and they never ask about me. This is where my heart breaks for you, because I know when I'm working with my clients, they're so smart and they're so great at their work. And on a personal level, they have such big hearts. I find I attract a certain kind of personality, and it is just, I think they're beautiful humans, but it doesn't connect in English. And that breaks my heart because I know that you deserve to have those genuine connections. So this is one of the ways where you can be more yourself in a way that is conducive to making connections. I want you to ask questions. So what this looks like is instead of telling your whole story, you're going to give a bullet point. So for example, how was your vacation? Instead of giving them a 20-minute lecture, you're going to give something simple. For example, oh, it was really beautiful. That was my first time at the Amalfi Coast. The waters were so blue. What about you? Have you been to Italy or the Amalfi Coast? Then they're going to answer. And based on their answer, you'll see if they want more details or if they change the subject or if they're busy and need to walk away. So it's not about, I don't want you to think whatever their answer is rude, but it's the indicator of how to move forward with your story. So if the person has time and they're really interested, they might say like, oh yeah, I went there last year, but tell me about you. Like, what were some of the things that you did? So when they give it back to you, that means they want more details. If they say something like, no, I've never been there, but hopefully one day. Anyway, I got to go. I have a meeting. It doesn't mean they don't want to hear about it. It just means that in that setting, whether you're maybe walking around the building or you were running into each other somewhere, they have to go. So don't take it personally in that they don't want to know more about your story. It's just the situation didn't lend itself. If they want to know more, they'll bring it back up later. Maybe you'll run into them again. Maybe you go to a happy hour with your colleagues and they're like, oh, I remember you mentioned you went to Italy. So tell me more about it. So this is where asking questions, it keeps you from monopolizing the conversation. It helps you communicate in a way that is more natural. So the back and forth. And it allows you to understand when more details are needed and wanted. Now, by understanding this, now you know, and now you're able to observe conversations, whether it's in movies or shows, maybe listen when other people are talking around you, and you'll start seeing the pattern. And when you understand the pattern, when you understand our communication style, it's really cool. It's cool because you're like, oh, it's not that they're being rude. It's not that they're just saying like, great, bye. You start realizing that that's how we communicate. And then you start noticing when people go deeper. And again, it's also about creating a safe space. If you're constantly monopolizing the conversation with just your monologue about your life, you're not creating a safe space in that they don't feel valued. And you might think, I really want to know more about this person, but they never share. It's because you never asked any questions. So now this is something where you get to really analyze. If getting to know people is something that's important to your personality, this is a way that you can study this further, you can practice this more, and it's going to help you feel more comfortable so you can get to know them in a way that's respectful. Because there are other issues at play as well. For some cultures, and this is maybe I'll do another lunch and learn about this, the kind of questions you can ask with Americans, you don't want to ask super personal questions. So always keep it at things that are what's appropriate for us. For example, we never ask questions about salary, about religion, about politics, when those things come up. So my rule of thumb for you and for myself as well, if they bring up a topic, then that means it's a safe conversation to ask about or a safe topic. For example, another thing, I never ask about people's children or family. I let them bring it up. If somebody says, oh yeah, like my kids were crazy this weekend, or I took my kids to Disney World, then I know like, okay, that's a safe question. Oh, you have kids. How many kids do you have? If they mention like, oh, my husband and I celebrated our anniversary, then I know asking about their partner is appropriate. And I say this because not only is it an American norm, but I also believe in adding a layer of sensitivity and of care. So if you ask about someone's children before they're ready to talk about it, you don't know. Fertility is such a journey and can be a very painful journey for some people. And I don't want to trigger that. When it comes to asking, like, oh, are you married? Let them tell you first. Don't ask. And again, there are a lot of sensitivities there. That this is very important to me because you never know. Being part of the LGBTQ community, I've always been very sensitive about people asking because you never know if it's a safe space to share that. So that's why I always make sure let the other person set the standard for sensitive topics. And on your end, keep it things that are about interests, about work. You can do superficial stuff like the weather. Travel is a great one. So things that are still true to you, but don't go too personal too quick. Okay. Thank you so much. So I want you to really use those 3 tips to elevate your communication, to really understand the importance of storytelling, because storytelling is everywhere. It's from the smallest conversation you have with someone in the hallway to the small talk that you have with a client before a meeting. That's a very valuable time. It might feel kind of like a throwaway moment, but it's not. That helps you seal the deal. From making connections and new friendships in a new company or a new country. These are all things that are going to elevate your leadership as well as your life. And speaking of leadership, if you're interested in one-on-one coaching, I have an amazing leadership communication program. And this will really, what I mentioned before, as a non-native speaker, your training is going to be a little bit different. Your situation is unique. Your training should be unique. So this is an opportunity to get the leadership skills that you need with the communication skills that you deserve. You deserve to feel good when you speak English. And remember to get the 3 Essentials of American Leadership Communication audio training. Keep sending me messages about who you are, where you work, what your experiences are, and how I can best help you. I'm here for you. Thank you so much again, and I'll see you next time.